Hi folks, in this episode we're going to be talking about Herbie Hancock's Rockit. This was Herbie's biggest hit of his entire career. I think one of the most interesting and significant pieces of music of the 20th century, but also a weird one, a track that is impossible to categorize, one with a very complex and contradictory backstory, one that really makes it difficult to even talk about the concept of genre, much less determine what genre it might belong in, one that is comprised of samples and has itself been sampled many times, and one that sits in the middle of this like vast, complex network of musical connections and associations. In order to tell the story of Rockit, you need a little context on Herbie Hancock's career leading up to it. So Herbie Hancock, of course, one of the great jazz pianists of all time, first rose to prominence as a member of Miles Davis's second great quintet, along with Wayne Shorter, Ron Carter, and Tony Williams. Also in the 1960s made some classic albums as a leader. Here is his tune Maiden, Voyage from his album of the same name. If Herbie Hancock had quit playing in 1968, his place in the jazz canon would be secure. But then in the late 1960s, Miles Davis encouraged him to start playing electric piano and started playing all of this like fusion music, this music inspired by rock and funk and R&B. Herbie initially resisted that direction, but then began to see both the creative and commercial potential of it. And in the 1970s began playing synthesizers and writing all of this incredible funk music. From 1973, here's his song Chameleon, the lead-off track on his album Headhunters, which was at that time the biggest selling jazz album of all time. You might debate whether this even is jazz, though. I mean, later on, there are solos the way there are in a jazz tune, but I mean, stylistically, this doesn't really sound like jazz. Like, it's got the funk beat, it's super repetitive, it's got like no chord changes. I mean, there are some chords later on, but the main part of the song is just this 2-chord vamp, more like a James Brown song than a jazz tune. And it's all these synthesizers. As the 1970s progressed, Herbie moved further and further away from the sort of canonical mid-century jazz sound and into all of this music that really sounds a lot like disco. And he also began using a vocoder and began doing all of this singing. Here's Herbie's song, I Thought It Was You, from 1978.
Just a glance from behind, head went back
you are not hearing Herbie singing at all. You're hearing Herbie's synthesizer, but it's being filtered according to the frequency spectrum of Herbie's voice. The vocoder is a complicated technology, but an important one, and it's one that's central to Rockit. So before we go any further, let's have a quick discussion of what the vocoder is. The vocoder was developed by Bell Labs in the 1930s as a way to multiplex and encode telephone transmissions. So the idea was you would be able to carry multiple phone conversations on the same wire at the same time, and that it would be easier to encode them and keep people from listening in, especially for military communications. The way the vocoder works is it analyzes an audio signal by breaking it up into frequency bands. It determines, like millisecond by millisecond, how much sound energy there is within each of the frequency bands, and then it stores these readings. Rather than encoding the entire audio signal, it's just recording how loud it is within each frequency band, moment to moment, and just storing this list of numbers. To reconstitute the audio signal on the other end, the vocoder plays what's called a carrier, which is just a signal. Usually for telephone purposes, it's just white noise. So just, yeah. And then it filters out the white noise by only allowing through a certain amount of energy in each narrow frequency band. In other words, only allowing through the amount of energy that was present in each frequency band in the original signal. So it's not recreating the actual source audio, it's creating an approximation of it. You use a vocoder every time you talk on a cell phone. The cell phone is not digitizing the entire audio signal and transmitting it because that is way, way too much data. Instead, it's just analyzing how much energy is there in each of these narrow frequency bands and sending a list of those readings, which is a much smaller amount of data. And then on the receiving end, the phone is just playing white noise like that and filtering it out according to the amount of energy that should be present within each frequency band. And that is what you're hearing when you talk on a cell phone.
Here is what I sound like vocoded through white noise. You're not hearing my voice anymore. You're just hearing white noise filtered according to the frequency spectrum of my voice.
What musicians figured out pretty quickly is you don't need to use white noise as a carrier. You can use any kind of signal as a carrier. So for example, you could use a synthesizer. Here's a little synthesizer melody that I wrote. Now what I'm going to do is use the vocoder to filter that synthesizer sound to only allow through the amount of energy in each frequency band that is present in my voice. So you are not going to be hearing my voice at all. You're only going to be hearing the synthesizer, but you're going to hear it filtered according to the frequency spectrum of my voice.
So here is how I sound as vocoded via this synthesizer, and I sound like a singing robot.
Herbie loves the vocoder. He started using it on all his albums and singing all the time, and to this day, he continues to use a ton of vocoder. He loves it. The jazz critics do not love the vocoder, I think it's safe to say. And the listening public also wasn't that wild about Herbie's disco stuff because he's still Herbie Hancock. Like, it's still very intellectual and harmonically advanced. So it's like a little too weird to be pop music, but it's too pop to be jazz. And so by the early 80s, Herbie wasn't doing so well commercially, and he needed a new direction. In the offices of his record label, Elektra, he met this guy, Bill Laswell, who was the bass player in a band called Material. And Material was a very hipstery, kind of industrial, electronic, free jazz noise band that was also trying to make pop music, if such a thing makes sense. Here's one of Material's tracks from 1982. This is a song called Take a Chance with guest vocals by Nona Hendryx. This gives you a pretty good idea of what Material is about, right? Like it's structured like a pop song. It's got this fun beat, but timbrally, it's very electronic. Like she's singing through a vocoder and you have all these drum machines and synthesizers. In the early 80s, like this would have sounded really harsh and futuristic and maybe even kind of scary. And even now, right, it's pretty heavy and industrial. Herbie liked these guys. He was interested in them. And he thought, maybe like this is a direction I could move in. Meanwhile, Herbie asked his godson to just make him a tape of like, what are the young people listening to right now? Like, what's cool? What's going on? And one of the songs that was on this mixtape was Buffalo Gals by Malcolm McLaren. Malcolm McLaren had put together this drum machine beat and then gotten a bunch of hip hop DJs to scratch on top of it.
Three Buffalo Gals go around the outside. Four Buffalo Gals go around the outside, round the outside, round the outside. Four Buffalo Gals go around the outside and don't your partners.
This sounds pretty primitive compared to hip hop, from even a few years later. But in 1983, this was a radical new idea. The only places where you would be hearing people scratching records like this would be in extremely cool clubs in cities with a lot of Black and Latino people. So the Bronx, right? Or, occasionally downtown Manhattan. Like sometimes these DJs would come down from the Bronx and scratch in downtown clubs also. But you would have had to have been an extremely cool person if you lived outside one of these neighborhoods to have even heard of this concept. And Herbie really liked it. He was really interested in it. He's always been interested in whatever is going on technology-wise and what's going on creatively. So that was what was in his head when he approached Bill Laswell and Material and said, why don't you guys make some tracks for me and, we'll see if they click. Bill Laswell and Michael Beinhorn got together with Martin Beasy, an engineer who they worked with, and they put together this instrumental. Michael Beinhorn programmed a beat on an Oberheim DMX drum machine. This is the same drum machine that Run-DMC used for Sucker MCs.
A friend of mine asked me to say some MC rhyme, so I said this rhyme I'm about to say. The rhyme was there, but then it went this way. Took a test to become an MC, and Orange Cliff became amazed at me, so Larry put me inside.
It's a great drum timbre, but it's a little stiff sounding. This is before drum machines were capable of swing. They brought in a percussionist named Daniel Ponce to play Bambaataa drums, these kind of conga-like drums. Rockit includes a bunch of samples, and one of them comes very early in the song, this electric guitar stab, this meh. That is sampled from We're Gonna Groove by Led Zeppelin, released in 1982, but recorded some years before that. And the reason that they sampled Led Zeppelin is they actually wanted one of the snare drums from the intro to the song. They thought, the snare drum on the Oberheim DMX drum machine, it's not quite beefy enough. So they just wanted to layer in a snare sample on top of that. And in 1983, sampling was really difficult. The Material guys were trying to use this digital delay unit, like this thing that creates digital echoes. And the way it does that is by storing a little snippet of the audio in a buffer and then playing it back repeatedly. But if you're clever, you could just store that little bit of audio and then just play it back as a sample. So they were trying to capture a single snare drum hit, but by accident, they captured something from a few seconds later in the song, this little bit of one of the guitar chords. And they thought, hey, that sounds pretty cool. We should just use that. If you listen closely to that guitar stab, it's very, very short and it gets repeated. So it's not It's more like it repeats like that. The bass line to Rockit is not a sample, but it is a quote or an interpolation. Bill Laswell says that he got it from a Pharoah Sanders recording called Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt from 1966. And so that melody that Pharoah Sanders is scat singing, Bill Laswell adapted it into the bass line to Rockit. And then they had some hip-hop DJs scratch turntables on top of it. The main one was Grand Mixer DST. He later changed his name to Grand Mixer DXT in honor of Malcolm X. And there were also some additional turntable scratches added by Mr. C and Booski of the Infinity Rappers and Grandmaster Caz. So Bill Laswell and Michael Beinhorn came to Herbie with this tape, and Herbie was into it. He really liked it. At his home studio in LA, he and Michael Beinhorn and Bill Laswell came up with this vocal melody together, and Herbie played it on a couple of synths. This melody that Herbie and the Material guys came up with is a pretty interesting one. It's in A minor, and it uses the pitches A, B, C, D, D sharp, E, and G. That's a lot like the blues scale, A, C, D, D sharp, E, and G, but with this added note B. There is no such thing as the blues scale. There are a lot of different pitch collections that get used in the blues, but when people talk about, quote, the blues scale, unquote, what they mean is this scale, 1, flat 3, 4, sharp 4, 5, flat 7. The bass line is a simpler pitch collection. It is just the A minor pentatonic scale, so A, C, D, E, and G. And that's really it for the pitch content of the song. I mean, Herbie does play some very dense cluster chords on the synth and for some of his like vocoder sounds. I'm not going to try to break down what those are, but yeah, it's pitch-wise pretty minimalist, and there are no chords, much less chord changes. And then Herbie thought, I also want to do some like scat singing on it through the vocoder. And Bill Laswell and Michael Beinhorn said, oh, well, yeah, that's a good idea. You should try quoting some lyrics from this song called Planet Rock by Afrika, Bambaataa, and the Soulsonic Force.
Everybody just rock it, don't stop it. Gotta rock it, don't stop. Keep ticking and talking, working all around the clock. Everybody keep rocking and clocking and shocking and rocking. Go house, everybody say rock it, don't stop it. 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 Rock it, don't stop it.
The track concludes with a synth solo. I think he is playing it on a clavitar, which is like a kind of a keytar basically, with this very cool pitch bend control where the neck of the guitar would be. And the solo begins with this really fantastic long blue note on the synthesizer. I don't actually know which synth Herbie is playing it on. Like, it sounds like he's using the clavitar as a controller, but there are a whole bunch of synths mentioned in the liner notes of the album. I don't know, look in the episode notes for some ideas as to what it is that he might be playing. The most striking feature of this song is the turntable scratch solo that's performed by Grand Mixer DXT. Like I said, turntable scratching was a pretty exotic technique outside of certain clubs in black neighborhoods and very hipstery white neighborhoods. And pretty much no one had heard it on a recording, certainly not like a mainstream commercial recording. So for a lot of people, Rockit was their first exposure to this concept. And I mean, it must have sounded like nothing on earth in 1983. The source of that sound is a pretty interesting one. It's from a track by B-Side and Fab Five Freddy called Change le Beat from 1982, which Bill Laswell produced.
Change le beat. Change le beat.
The story behind it is a pretty funny one. The idea was Fab Five Freddy would be rapping through this vocoder with a white noise carrier. And, you know, it doesn't really sound like much of anything. Like Fab Five Freddy is a cool guy, but this is barely a song. So they thought, okay, this is not really enough to carry a song. So a reporter named Bernard Zecri, a French guy, was in the studio and his girlfriend was with him. And she wasn't really a rapper, but she had kind of a cool voice. So the thought was, oh, let's just get her in the booth and have her rap some stuff with her French accent. So they tried that. And then they thought, okay, this is still kind of a mess. But then Roger Trilling, who was Bill Laswell's manager, thought, all right, well, why don't I try something? So he gets in the booth and he starts imitating this record label executive, this kind of nerdy middle-aged guy who, when he liked something, would say, wow, this stuff is really fresh. And this guy did not know that at the time, fresh was hip-hop slang. Roger Trilling just thought it was funny that like this guy was saying that stuff was fresh, not realizing that he sounded like he was using hip-hop slang. And so he just did his imitation into the mic through the vocoder.
Ah, this stuff is really fresh.
And they just stuck that on the end of the track, and that was that. Hip-hop DJs love this recording, specifically the words ah and fresh. They just sound really, really good when you scratch them. Like there's something about the fact that they're basically just these blasts of white noise, and so they sound really good when pitched up and down. They've got this nice crisp attack. They have these slightly different frequency blends due to the different vowels and the different consonants. And also, they just sound like the words ah and fresh, which are cool words to scratch. So a large percentage of the time, when you hear someone doing turntable scratching, what you're hearing is the words ah and fresh from the end of Change le Beat. So for example, here is Eric B. and Rakim's classic Paid in Full from 1987, and it ends with Eric B. scratching on ah and fresh. Here's DJ Premier in Deep Concentration by Gang Starr from 1989, and this is the great DJ Premier scratching up, among other things, the words ah and fresh, and also the little beep that comes right before ah.
Transform. Transform. Transform.
Herbie was excited by all of this, but also a little bit nervous. And if Herbie was nervous, the record label was extremely nervous. In Herbie's autobiography, Possibilities, there's a section about this song, and Herbie describes it as a music revolution. And he says, before Laswell, Beinhorn, and DST, I had been only dimly aware of what was happening in the Bronx. Now I was thrilled beyond words to be in the middle of it, working with guys who had skills I hadn't even imagined before. This music was exciting and unpredictable because scratching lets you change direction suddenly, cutting to another sound or groove. It was totally avant-garde, but within the popular music context. Exploring all these new possibilities made me feel more energized than I had in years. When we finished the first cut of Rockit, Tony and I took it to David Rubinson, who was Herbie's manager. We played it for him, and he made a face like he'd eaten a lemon. Oh man, he said, do you really want to do this? Come on, you're Herbie Hancock. My mouth fell open. Here I thought this new direction was the hottest thing going in music, and I was lucky to be on board in its infancy. And David thought it was somehow beneath me. I couldn't even get my head around that. I was disappointed that David and I were so far apart now in our musical vision, primarily because even though he wasn't producing my records anymore, he was still my manager, so I was really going to need him to support the new record. But David wasn't the only one who had doubts. One day in the studio, I played a couple of tracks for Brian Bell. Brian and I were coming to the end of our partnership too, but he was still working with me as we were recording Future Shock. When Brian listened to the tracks, he said, you know, Herbie, your fans might not like this. I just shook my head, suddenly feeling very tired. Brian, I said, I'm so over this, I can't even tell you. What do you mean? He asked. Listen, my mother is still mad that I left the symphony, I said, throwing my hands in the air. When I stopped playing classical music and went to jazz, I got crap for it. When I left jazz to do space music, I got crap for it. When I left space music to do funk, I got crap for it. And when I left funk to do what I'm doing now, I'm still getting crap for it. Everybody else is so concerned about what I'm doing, but I'm not doing it for them, I told him. I'm doing this because I have to do this. If the fans come, great. If they don't come, it doesn't matter because I have to do this, because I want to do this. Now, as it turns out, Herbie's instincts were correct. The jazz fans definitely hated Rockit, but young people loved it, especially urban young people, especially Black and Latino people, and especially breakdancers. In New York City in the 80s, you could not leave your house without hearing Rockit playing from somebody's boombox and without seeing people breakdancing to it. It was an absolute early hip-hop classic, a very influential track. There are a number of rap producers who will say, you know, the first time I ever had the idea to do this was hearing Herbie Hancock's Rockit. And the concept got a huge boost in 1984 when Herbie was invited to perform on the Grammys. And he had Grand Mixer DST out there scratching. He had all these weird mechanical robots that were used in the Rockit music video. He had his guitar and a headset mic and was scat singing through the vocoder. And some of these robots turned out to be dancers disguised as robots who came out in front and started breakdancing. And, you know, the crowd at the Grammys went bananas. A lot of people on TV were watching also went bananas. And I mean, you know, it's kind of an 80s-tastic watch now, but like, I don't know. I still think it's just super futuristic and cool. Certainly at the time, it was all very controversial, but I would say Herbie has been 100% vindicated by all of it. Like now, I mean, of course, turntable scratching, like it's practically a like classical sound almost, but it is worth reflecting on what a weird and avant-garde idea it is. The idea of like performing an existing recording as a musical instrument and using it to make new music. That is wild. And, you know, it's one thing to do this in like a Stockhausen or John Cage record, but like to do it in pop music where, you know, it's supposed to be enjoyed by regular people and even danced to. I mean, that is just like a really bold and courageous idea, and still one that is pretty controversial. Like I know a lot of musicians who are deeply, deeply opposed to this idea of using existing recorded music as a base for making new music, and quite independent of the legality of it. Just the idea, like it seems like stealing, like taking someone else's musical idea and just using it for your own thing. Now, the contradiction here is there is no original music that doesn't involve existing ideas. I mean, you literally cannot write or compose without making contact with some idea that somebody else has had. And in fact, most music that you enjoy is like 99% identical to existing music, or you would not enjoy it. Like stuff has to be familiar in order to even make sense most of the time. But somehow, if you're just like using existing note combinations and chords, that seems much more okay than like taking an existing record and like putting it on the turntable and scratching it as a musical performance. And, this is before we get into the idea of like taking digital samples, right? The idea of using a little segment of a Led Zeppelin guitar chord rather than having a guitarist play on your track. I mean, people's feelings run very high about this. Like, I always ask my students whether they think it's okay. And at this point, most of them are hip hop fans who are like, yeah, it's fine. But even when they think it's okay in an abstract sense, a lot of them are still uncomfortable with the idea of trying it themselves. And this is even before we get into the legal complexities of it. This episode is already going to be long, so I'm not going to get into the legality of using samples or turntable scratching, but I think it was a huge risk for Herbie and the Material guys and Grand Mixer DST back in the 80s. And even now, yeah, it's still a pretty bold aesthetic choice. As befits a piece of music that is heavily comprised of other pieces of music, Rockit has itself been sampled and remixed many, many, many times. Back in 1983, Grand Mixer DXT himself remixed Rockit a couple of times. First, here is the Rockit Megamix. And now here's Megamix 2, Why Is It Fresh? And I love this track. Love it, love it, love it.
And now with the following collection of ghoulish sound.
Herbie. Keep up the keys, ha! They got follow. Keep up the keys, ha! Herbie.
Like, I just think it's so cool and futuristic sounding. Like, yeah, aesthetically, it does sound kind of 80s. Mixing using vinyl records is really, really difficult. It takes an unbelievable amount of technical precision and practice. It's certainly easier to do this kind of thing now with Ableton Live, where the tempos just get lined up automatically. It's really easy to just like edit on the grid lines. But yeah, I just love like the audacity of it and the freshness of it. From 1985, here is Lesson 1, The Payoff Mix by Double D and Steinsky.
Play it for her, play it for me. Play it for her, play it for me. Play it. Play it. Play it. Play it. Play it. Play it.
Hey, kick it!
This wasn't made by scratching vinyl records. This was made by editing analog tape. And when I say editing, I mean like measuring stretches of tape using like a stopwatch and the tape counter, and then using a razor blade to cut it, and like literal tape, like sticky tape, to tape the pieces together. And oh my God, I have done just enough tape editing to know how mind-numbingly tedious and difficult it is. I shudder to imagine how long this took. And it's pretty delightful, yeah? It's a lot of fun. From 1997, here is Rockit Remix by Groove Rider, a drum and bass producer. This is a pretty extreme remix. Like, it's barely even recognizable as pertaining to Rockit. It's just these individual little notes from the melody cut into a new melody with this new instrumental backing behind it. Here is a much more obvious Rockit sample. This is So Excited by Janet Jackson featuring Kia from 2006.
breathe. Making me sing. Making me so excited. I'm hot. Come on. I'm so ready, ready. And I'll open my spot for you anytime you want me to. So you act bad, don't hurt me. Look sexy, talk dirty. And I'll open my spot for you anytime you want me to. So you the same reason might be the money.
Here's a track called Pace in the Floor by Charisma and Peanut Butter Wolf from 2007. And this isn't a literal sample of Rockit. This is Peanut Butter Wolf recreating the iconic Grand Mixer DXT scratch.
Pace in the floor, thinking where's my next pace? Pace in the floor, looking for my mind to create hip-hop. So I come with something bug, meditate at my rest. Here goes my mic plug, hook me in when I'm headed downtown. Give my crew sounds, they know I'm still around. Coolin', bagging up crews with no doubt. When I'm rolling dice, I got my boys on the lookout.
Finally, here's Charlie Tuna with Rockit Freestyle. And I got this from a DJ performance by Z-Trip on BBC Radio 1 Hip Hop Takeover.
Back up on the prowl, flip the script, the fish who spit sick vows. Tuna fish and DST is on the mix. Turns and twists, he flicks his wrist. Come and get it if you think that you can hang with killers doing their thing. Poison venom, wets the tips of my fangs. Never underestimate the way we demonstrate that we eliminate the competition. Listen, Tuna comma, Unabomber, not a drama starter. Keep my promise when I say we gonna rip shit. Now, we do what we do, and the group is gonna keep this tight for you. So what it do? Fellas and ladies too, we keep it true and we gon' keep this tight for you. Now can you tell me what it do? We do what we do, and we the crew that's gonna keep this tight for you. Fellas and ladies too, we keep it true and we gon' keep this tight for you. That's a fact. Tuna comma, Unabomber, not a drama starter. Let's smash, we roll, we take control. Here we go. One more.
Rockit is a collaboration between these like industrial hip hop, funk, downtown avant-garde weirdos and Herbie Hancock, a genre-defying jazz, classical space funk musician and like a hip-hop DJ. So if you had to pick a genre for it, like what genre would it like? It's kind of hip hop, but like nobody's rapping, and there's jazz involved in it, but it would be a stretch to just call it jazz, and it would certainly sound weird if you stuck it into a playlist with like, you know, Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. It's pop in the sense that it was very popular, like it was a big pop hit, but like it definitely doesn't sound like a pop song. Like I wouldn't even call it a song at all. It's avant-garde in the sense that it uses these ideas that are somewhat inspired by like Karlheinz Stockhausen, but it's way too fun to be real avant-garde composition. So like, what is it? I would argue it's all of those things and none of those things, and that the concept of genre just doesn't even apply to this track. Herbie Hancock has certainly been a genre buster for his entire career, but maybe the problem here is not with Rockit or anything that Herbie Hancock has done. The problem is with the concept of genre, the idea that you can categorize music into this sort of tree-shaped folder hierarchy. Maybe the problem is with the entire idea of a tree-shaped folder hierarchy to begin with when describing something as complex and multidimensional as music. Rather than think of Rockit as belonging to a clear and unambiguous genre, I think it's better to think of Rockit as existing within this network of connections and associations. And there's a term that I learned in my graduate school days, the rhizome, from the French philosophers Deleuze and Guattari. A rhizome is something that is from the world of plants. So like the roots of a tree are part of this elaborate network of like fungi and the roots of other plants that are all like sharing chemical signals with each other and sharing nutrients with each other. And so if you look at what's happening underground in a forest, it's this incredibly complex kind of tangled web of different roots and threads from a lot of different organisms. And you can't even really meaningfully separate it into separate organisms. Like it's all just this huge system all kind of working together. And what Deleuze and Guattari are arguing is you could conceptualize human knowledge and thought in terms of this sort of network structure rather than this top-down hierarchical structure. So, for example, the internet is not a bunch of neatly organized nested folders. It's this web. I mean, it's literally a web. It's the World Wide Web, right? It's just nodes connecting to other nodes, and some nodes connect to a lot of other nodes, and so are more kind of central, and some nodes only connect to a few other nodes, so they're more peripheral. But nothing is like higher up than anything else. It's all just kind of horizontal. Your brain is also structured like a rhizome. There's no top-down organization to your brain. There's no module that's like in charge. There's just a lot of modules that are interconnected, and sometimes one module is kind of approximately steering the other ones, but not really. Yeah. So if you're thinking of genres as these folders, and that a piece of music has to be in one of these folders and not in the other folders, then Rockit just, it seems crazy. Like it just doesn't make sense in that context. But if you think of Rockit as a node in a horizontal network, then it makes perfect sense, right? It's like a central node. It's connecting up all of these other disparate nodes in the network. And viewed that way, Rockit seems like a pretty significant piece of music. Like rather than thinking of it as this weird outlier or this oddball, you might think of it as kind of a culmination of everything that Herbie Hancock has been up to in his career. It's certainly been, richly influential on music since then. If you're trying to think of jazz as like a separate category from other music, Rockit is a weird outlier. If you read like histories of jazz, they tend to not talk about Herbie Hancock's later career. Like he's kind of a problem for them. But if you just think of music more generally, especially if you're thinking about electronic music, dance music, hip hop, these larger kind of currents, then yeah, Rockit seems like a really critical juncture. Rockit just seems like a confluence of a lot of like huge forces and ideas that subsequently exploded out into global popular culture and have now touched like every form of popular music on earth pretty much. So yeah, there you have it. Rockit by Herbie Hancock. Really one of the weirdest, most delightful, and I think most important pieces of music of the entire 20th century, something that Herbie Hancock took a lot of heat for and deserves a lot of praise for. And independently of all of that, just still to this day, an absolute banger. Thank you very much for listening.